Welcome to my channel. Subscribe to the channel and listen to my stories every day. I stood by the window, watching Molly's reflection in the glass as she talked. Her words felt distant, like an echo coming from someplace far away. She was telling me she needed freedom to explore herself, that she wanted to reclaim her individuality and have time to recharge. I couldn't help but stare at the woman before me, her voice polished and her expressions unnaturally calm, as if she were delivering a well-rehearsed speech rather than explaining why she was about to spend the weekend away with her new colleague, Nick. I nodded absently, feeling a dull ache growing inside me. For 5 years, we'd built a life together, a life that, until recently, felt as solid and unbreakable as the walls of our home. We had everything: successful careers, a beautiful house, close friends. We were a team, I thought, a real partnership built on shared dreams and mutual respect. Or maybe that's just what I wanted to believe. Molly continued, her tone steady and practiced. She didn't falter once, and yet I could see hints of something, guilt, in the flicker of her eyes and the way her fingers fidgeted with the edge of the tablecloth. Still, she avoided my gaze, focusing instead on the script she'd so clearly prepared. "I need this time, Billy," she said, a hint of irritation slipping through when I didn't respond. "You're always so grounded and secure, you don't understand how it feels to be lost." She tried to soften her words with a half-smile, but it did little to hide the thinly veiled criticism. I looked at her carefully, weighing my words. "Lost?" I asked, feeling the weight of disbelief settle into my bones. "Molly, if you're feeling that way, then why not talk to me? Why is this necessary?" The word felt thick, heavy, as I said it, like a boulder I couldn't quite move. "It's not something you'd understand, Billy," she replied, brushing me off as if I were the naive one here. "I just need a little space. This isn't about you. It's just something I need to do for me." For a moment, I saw a glimpse of the Molly I'd fallen in love with, the sparkle in her eyes, the charm that drew people in, her laughter, her warmth. But this version of her, the one standing in front of me, felt cold, distant, like a stranger wearing my wife's face. She finished her speech and finally looked up, likely expecting an explosion, a barrage of questions or accusations. But the anger was trapped under a cold, impenetrable surface, buried under a lifetime of learning to hold it together. I gave her a slow nod. "All right," I said, my voice almost a whisper, "if that's what you need, then go ahead." Surprise flickered in her eyes, but she quickly recovered, smiling in relief as though I'd just given her permission to breathe. She reached over and squeezed my hand, the touch a hollow echo of what it used to be. "Thank you, Billy. I knew you'd understand." She packed her bags that evening, and I watched in silence as she gathered her things, her face lit with excitement she tried to hide. As she moved through the house, I could see her transforming, shedding the life we'd built together in favor of something new, something that no longer included me. Once she'd gone to bed, I stayed up, the shadows stretching long into the silence as I paced the living room. Memories washed over me, the late-night conversations, the shared dreams, the life we'd woven together thread by thread. I clenched my fists, feeling a storm of anger and betrayal stirring, the ache in my chest growing sharper by the minute. But I swallowed it down, forcing myself to remain calm. If she thought she could rewrite the rules of our marriage without consequence, she was about to learn just how wrong she was. The next morning, I rose before dawn, slipping out of bed quietly as Molly slept. She lay on her side, her face peaceful and undisturbed, oblivious to the tempest brewing within me. I made my way to the study, a place where I'd always felt in control. With the door closed, I finally allowed myself to acknowledge the anger that had settled in my gut like a dark, living thing. I started by gathering records, bank statements, property deeds, our insurance policies. If she wanted to gamble with our life together, I would make sure the odds were in my favor. I spent hours combing through our financial records, calculating what I could take, what I could leave. Molly had made it clear she was no longer interested in the boundaries we'd set together, so I would make my own. At first, my actions felt petty, a hollow attempt to assert control. But as I delved deeper, I felt a strange calm settle over me, the kind that only comes when every detail is accounted for, every possibility prepared for. I wasn't just taking stock of our finances, I was taking control of my future, crafting a path forward that would no longer be shadowed by the lies and betrayal that now colored every aspect of my marriage. When Molly woke up, she moved through the house with a lightness I hadn't seen in a long time. She packed her bags, humming softly to herself as if this were just any other trip. Meanwhile, I watched her, feeling like an intruder in my own life, a spectator to the wreckage of everything I'd once held sacred. As she closed her suitcase and glanced at me, her eyes softened. "Billy," she said, a hint of that familiar tenderness slipping through, "thank you for understanding. I'll call you when I get there." I forced a tight smile, the effort nearly breaking me. "Of course, Molly. Have a good trip." She hesitated for a moment, as if sensing something was off, but then brushed it aside, flashing me a bright smile before walking out the door. I waited until her car disappeared down the street before I let out a slow, shuddering breath. It was done. She was gone. And now, I was free to act. The rest of the day passed in a haze, the anger simmering just beneath the surface as I finalized my plans. I made a call to my lawyer, explaining everything. She listened quietly, her tone professional and detached, and as she laid out the steps for divorce proceedings, I could feel the weight lifting, bit by bit, with every word she said. By the time we hung up, I was no longer simply a betrayed husband, I was a man ready to move forward. Molly's car pulled back into the driveway on Sunday evening. I heard her footsteps approaching the door, light and cheerful, and I braced myself for what was to come. As she stepped inside, the faint smell of perfume and something sharper, cologne, maybe, clung to her. She spotted me in the kitchen, her face lighting up, but when she saw the envelope in my hand, the smile faltered. "What's this?" she asked, her voice just barely wavering. I looked her in the eye, keeping my expression calm. "It's a draft," I said. "A preliminary document for our divorce." The words felt strange in my mouth, yet they brought a strange satisfaction, a finality to the lies that had poisoned our life together. Her face went pale, her carefully constructed facade crumbling as she looked down at the papers in her hand. She stared at the envelope in her hands, her fingers trembling slightly as she flipped it over. I watched her closely, every flicker of emotion crossing her face, a small, twisted satisfaction. Shock, confusion, anger, they all played across her features as she tried to absorb what was happening. Finally, she looked up at me, and for the first time, I saw something close to fear in her eyes. "Billy, what is this?" Her voice was barely a whisper, but the crack in her composure was clear. I leaned against the kitchen counter, keeping my own voice calm. "I think you know what it is, Molly." Her mouth opened, then closed. She looked down at the envelope, her grip tightening as if she could crush it, make it disappear. This is ridiculous," she said, her tone laced with forced laughter. "What are you doing?" "Setting things straight," I replied, my voice cold. "I know about Nick. I know about your trips. And I know you've decided you're no longer interested in keeping the promises we made." Her face paled even further, and she took a shaky step back. "Billy, it's not what you think. Nick and I, there's nothing going on. We're just friends, and this weekend it was just a work trip." "You're overreacting." "Work trip?" I let out a hollow laugh, the bitterness filling the air between us. "Do you really expect me to believe that after everything? After all the late nights, the phone calls, the changes in your behavior?" "I'm not an idiot, Molly." She was silent, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for something to anchor herself. "Billy," she began again, her tone softer, pleading, "please, let's talk about this. You don't need to do this. We can work through it." "Work through what, exactly?" I asked, feeling the rage simmering just beneath my words. Your sudden need for freedom? Your desire to reclaim your individuality? Or should I say, your desire to rewrite the rules whenever it suits you? Molly's eyes filled with tears, and she looked down, gripping the envelope tightly as if it was the only thing keeping her steady. You don't understand, Billy, she said, her voice breaking. I was feeling lost. You're always so stable, so put together, and I don't know. I just needed a change. And that change involved sneaking around behind my back. The anger was bubbling up now, harder to control, and I took a step toward her, forcing her to look at me. Did you ever think about what this would do to us? To me? Or was that just a small price to pay for your little adventure? She flinched, her face crumpling as the tears spilled over. Billy, please, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I made a mistake, I admit that. But we've been together for so long, we've built so much. Don't throw it all away because of one mistake. A mistake? I repeated, shaking my head in disbelief. No, Molly. This wasn't a mistake. This was a series of choices you made, over and over again, knowing exactly what you were doing. Her shoulders slumped and she looked down, her fingers tracing the edge of the envelope. I don't know what I was thinking. I got caught up in something I shouldn't have. But I never stopped loving you, Billy. I know it sounds crazy, but it's true. I still love you. I felt a pang in my chest, the familiar ache of everything we'd once had, everything I'd once believed in. But the pain was dulled now, buried under the betrayal that had gutted our life together. Love? I said quietly, meeting her gaze. If this is what you call love, then I want no part of it. She looked away, a fresh wave of tears streaming down her face. I felt a strange sense of detachment, as though I were watching this unfold from a distance, as though this weren't my life unraveling before me. But the anger remained, steady and unyielding, reminding me of why I couldn't allow myself to falter now. Molly took a deep, shuddering breath and finally looked up, her expression shifting from despair to something closer to desperation. Billy, I'll do anything. I'll quit my job, I'll stop seeing Nick, I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. I studied her for a long moment, watching the fear in her eyes grow. There was a time when I would have done anything to protect her, to shield her from pain, but now I could see the cold, stark reality. I don't think there's anything left to fix, Molly. She shook her head, a fresh sob escaping her lips. No, don't say that. We've been through too much to just give up now. We can go to counseling, we can talk to someone. We can fix this, I know we can. I felt the bitterness welling up inside me, like a weight pressing down on my chest. This isn't something you fix, Molly. This isn't a crack in the wall or a leak in the roof. This is trust, respect, honesty, all the things you threw away the moment you decided you wanted something else. She was silent, her face a mask of anguish as she absorbed my words. I wanted to feel something, satisfaction, maybe, or at least a sense of closure, but all I felt was a hollow emptiness, a void where my love for her used to be. We stood there in silence, the weight of everything unsaid hanging heavy in the air. Finally, she swallowed hard, her voice barely above a whisper. What happens now? I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. Now, we separate our lives. We split our assets, we sell the house, and we go our separate ways. You wanted freedom, Molly. Well, now you've got it. She looked at me, her eyes wide and filled with disbelief. Billy, you can't just walk away. We're married. We took vows. Vows you broke, I reminded her, my voice steady. You made your choices, Molly. Now it's time for me to make mine. She opened her mouth to argue, to plead, but no words came. Instead, she looked down at the envelope in her hands, her shoulders slumping in defeat. So that's it? You're just giving up? I felt a flicker of anger, the last ember of the betrayal that had scorched everything I'd once held dear. No, Molly. I'm not giving up. I'm letting go. With that, I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her standing there, the envelope clutched tightly in her hands. I didn't look back. I didn't want to see the pain on her face, didn't want to feel the guilt that threatened to creep in at the edges of my resolve. I stepped outside, the cool evening air washing over me as I closed the door behind me. The stars were beginning to emerge, scattered across the darkening sky like fragments of a life that had once felt whole. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the past slipping away, replaced by a strange, bittersweet sense of freedom. As I walked down the driveway, the house growing smaller in the distance, I felt a surge of determination, a resolve that had been absent for far too long. Molly had made her choices, and now I was making mine. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with the unknown, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was heading in the right direction. The morning after I left Molly standing in the kitchen, I woke with an unusual clarity, like my senses were suddenly heightened. The air was crisp and cool, the faint scent of dew on the grass wafting in through the open window, mingling with the unfamiliar sense of freedom I felt. For the first time in years, I wasn't weighed down by the constant, simmering worry of wondering where Molly was, who she was with, or what she was hiding. I moved through my morning slowly, savoring each quiet moment, the sunlight streaming through the windows like a balm. Coffee tasted better, breakfast felt like a small celebration of the new life I was beginning. But the reality of what lay ahead quickly reasserted itself. In just a few days, I'd have to start facing the practical fallout of ending my marriage. Our lives were woven together in ways that would take more than one signature on a paper to unwind. After breakfast, I picked up the phone and dialed the lawyer I'd spoken with the day before. Her no-nonsense tone made me feel steadier, more in control, as she outlined what we'd need to do next. "We'll start with your financials," she said, her voice brisk and efficient. "I'll need records of your joint accounts, mortgage documents, and any other assets you share. Then we'll go through any debts, credit cards, all of it. Divorce is, unfortunately, just as much about numbers as emotions." I nodded, making a list as she spoke. She gave me instructions on how to draft a preliminary list of shared assets and then went on to discuss the possibility of mediation. "If you can avoid a drawn-out court battle, Billy, it'll be easier on both of you," she said, her tone softening slightly. "Divorces can be ugly. But if you and Molly can agree to a fair split, you'll walk away with your sanity mostly intact." I hesitated, imagining a battle that would drain me of the little energy I had left. The last thing I wanted was to drag this out, to have my life split open and examined in a courtroom, each accusation and rebuttal spilling out like dark secrets. But I also knew Molly. Beneath her polished, collected demeanor, there was a streak of stubbornness, one that wouldn't easily accept defeat. She wasn't going to walk away without a fight. As soon as I hung up, I felt the weight of what lay ahead settle on my shoulders, and I decided to face it head-on. I spent the next few hours gathering paperwork, sifting through bank statements, tax returns, insurance policies, and the dozens of little details that made up the infrastructure of our life together. The task was tedious, but it was grounding too, a reminder that I still had control over something in my life, however small. Late that afternoon, there was a knock on the door. For a second, my heart skipped, and I half expected to see Molly standing there, maybe with some desperate attempt at reconciliation or apology. But it was my neighbor, Jeff, holding a bottle of bourbon and wearing a concerned expression. "Mind if I come in?" he asked, his tone tentative. Jeff was the sort of neighbor everyone wanted, reliable, low drama, always willing to lend a hand when needed. Over the years, we'd had countless cookouts and game nights with Jeff and his wife, Karen, and in a way, he'd become a second family. I nodded, stepping aside to let him in, and he followed me to the kitchen, setting the bourbon down on the counter. He poured us each a glass, the amber liquid catching the late afternoon light. So, he said, taking a careful sip, Karen told me what happened. I nodded, feeling a strange relief at not having to explain. Jeff and Karen knew Molly and me well enough to see through any facade we tried to put up. I guess it was bound to come out eventually, I said, my voice sounding distant, even to myself. Jeff looked at me carefully. I'm sorry, man. I know that's not much to say, but, well, I know this isn't easy. I nodded, taking a sip and savoring the burn of the bourbon as it slid down my throat. Thanks. It's strange. I thought I'd feel more devastated, but right now, I just feel numb. He nodded, understanding without words. We sat there for a while, each of us lost in our thoughts, the silence between us a comforting presence. Eventually, he broke the silence. Karen and I were just saying last week how you two seemed distant lately. But we didn't think, he trailed off, not finishing the thought, but the implication hung in the air. I didn't think so either, I replied quietly. Not until she started changing. She started pulling away, and then there were the late nights, the unexplained trips. I looked down at my glass, the memories resurfacing in painful clarity. I ignored it, Jeff. I let her slip away, thinking that if I just waited it out, it would pass. But it didn't. And now, here we are. Jeff nodded, his face etched with sympathy. Listen, I know it probably doesn't help right now, but you're better off without her if she's going to treat you like that. You deserve better. I forced a smile, appreciating his loyalty, even though his words felt hollow. Thanks, Jeff. I know you're right. He patted me on the shoulder, his grip firm. Karen and I are here for you. You need anything, someone to talk to, help with moving, whatever, you know where we are. I nodded, feeling a warmth that was rare these days. Jeff left a little while later, and as I watched him walk across the lawn back to his own house, I realized how much I'd come to rely on these simple, steady friendships, the small moments of connection that made life bearable. I felt grateful for it, but also a pang of loneliness. Without Molly, I'd be facing this alone. The days that followed passed in a blur of paperwork and meetings with the lawyer. Molly had moved out, staying at a friend's place, which left the house feeling oddly empty and quiet. I tried to focus on work, throwing myself into projects and deadlines, but the hollowness remained, a constant reminder of everything I'd lost. One evening, as I was organizing some documents, I came across an old photo album buried in a box at the back of a closet. It was from our early days together, back when everything had felt fresh and hopeful. I flipped through the pages slowly, each image bringing back memories of a time when I believed we were unbreakable. Our wedding day, vacations, holidays spent with family and friends, it was all there, a time capsule of the life we'd built together. I closed the album and leaned back, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of those memories settle over me. Part of me wanted to hold on to the past, to remember the good times and let them soften the bitterness that had taken root. But another part of me knew I couldn't do that, not if I wanted to move forward. The phone rang, breaking through the silence, and I picked it up, half expecting it to be Molly with another last-minute plea for forgiveness. But it was my lawyer, her tone brisk as she informed me of an upcoming mediation session she'd scheduled with Molly and her attorney. "It'll be hard, Billy," she said, her voice softening. "But if you can get through it, you'll be one step closer to freedom." I thanked her and hung up, the reality of the situation sinking in. Mediation was going to be a battlefield, a place where everything that had once been sacred between us would be stripped down, scrutinized, and divided. But if that was the price of my freedom, then I was willing to pay it. The day of the mediation arrived quickly, and as I entered the conference room, my heart pounded in my chest. Molly was already seated, her face carefully neutral as she looked up, her gaze meeting mine for the first time in weeks. I took my seat across from her, feeling the tension in the air thickening with every passing second. The mediator, a calm, middle-aged woman with a reassuring smile, began outlining the process, explaining how we'd go through each aspect of our assets, dividing them fairly. But all I could focus on was Molly, the way she sat there, composed and distant, as if she were a stranger. The session was grueling, each discussion over finances, property, and personal belongings stripping away the layers of the life we'd once shared. As we reached the topic of our house, Molly finally broke her silence, her voice softer than I'd expected. "Billy," she said, her gaze steady but laced with emotion. "Maybe we don't have to do this. We can still work things out. We've been together too long to just end it like this." I looked at her, seeing a glimmer of the woman I'd once loved, the one I'd thought I'd spend the rest of my life with. But that woman was gone, replaced by someone I barely recognized, someone who'd shattered our trust beyond repair. I took a deep breath, the words coming out steady and final. "Molly, we can't fix what's broken. We can only move on." She nodded, her face falling as the reality of my words sank in. And as I signed the papers that marked the official end of our marriage, I felt a strange mixture of sadness and relief. The first weeks after the divorce felt surreal. I went through each day like a ghost, drifting from one task to the next. Friends and family called, checking in to make sure I was okay, but their words felt like they were passing through me. The house, now mine alone, had grown cold and empty, each room a painful reminder of the life that had unraveled within its walls. I threw myself into work, taking on extra projects, anything to fill the void left by the absence of Molly's voice, her laughter, her presence. Even though I'd told myself that moving on was the right choice, the quiet emptiness that greeted me each night told me otherwise. And despite everything she'd done, despite all the hurt and betrayal, I still found myself reaching for her in the dark, as if some part of me hadn't caught up to the reality that she was gone. One night, several months after the papers were signed, I was organizing the basement, determined to get rid of every item that bore her memory. As I sifted through old boxes, I found another photo album, this one from our honeymoon. We'd taken a road trip up the California coast, laughing and talking as we drove, stopping at every beach and small town that caught our interest. Each photo captured that easy, spontaneous happiness I'd once thought would last a lifetime. I closed the album, my hands shaking as I felt the weight of regret settle over me. I'd given her up so easily. Had I really tried to understand her, to listen to what she'd been going through? Or had I let my pride and anger cloud everything we'd built? These questions haunted me, the quiet accusations echoing in my mind. I spent the next few days wrestling with the past, going over every moment we'd shared, wondering if I'd made the right choice. And though I'd told myself I'd done everything I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd let her slip away. That night, against my better judgment, I found myself dialing her number, the sound of her voicemail both a relief and a disappointment. It was late, nearly midnight, and sleep wouldn't come. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my thoughts spiraling until I finally gave in to the impulse I'd been fighting for months. I reached for my phone and texted her. "I'm sorry. I know it's too late, but I miss you." I didn't expect a response. Part of me didn't even want one, fearing what she might say, fearing that the life she'd built without me was already too far gone. I lay in bed, feeling foolish and small, wondering why I'd reached out after everything, wondering if I was just a man unable to let go of the past. But just as I drifted off, my phone buzzed. I jolted upright, my heart pounding as I saw her name on the screen. Her response was simple, only 3 words, but it was enough to keep me staring at my phone until dawn. "I miss you." We met at a cafe a few days later, a quiet place on the outskirts of town. She looked the same, yet different, as if the months apart had reshaped her into someone new. Her face was softer, her gaze calmer, but there was a sadness in her eyes that mirrored my own. We sat across from each other, exchanging the awkward pleasantries of people who knew everything about each other yet were suddenly strangers. "Why did you reach out, Billy?" she asked softly, her voice carrying a weight I hadn't expected. I looked down at my coffee, unable to meet her gaze. "I don't know. Maybe I was hoping we could, maybe start again. Maybe I made a mistake, letting you go." She nodded, a small, sad smile playing at her lips. I've thought the same thing. I've wondered if we gave up too soon. But, so much has happened. So much has changed. I don't know if we could ever go back to what we were. Maybe we don't have to go back, I replied, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. Maybe we could try again. Start fresh, without the lies, without the hurt. She looked at me, and for a moment, I saw hope flicker in her eyes. I want to, Billy. I really do. But I don't know if it's that simple. I don't know if we can just erase everything that happened. Silence fell between us, heavy and charged. I reached across the table, my hand hovering just above hers, but she pulled away, her expression pained. Billy, there's something I need to tell you. My heart sank. There was a finality in her tone, a quiet resignation that told me whatever she was about to say would change everything. I braced myself, fear prickling down my spine as I met her gaze. I went to the doctor last week, she began, her voice barely a whisper. I've been feeling off for a while now. I thought it was just the stress, everything that's happened. But, she trailed off, her hand trembling as she brushed a tear from her cheek. I waited, my stomach knotting with dread as the silence stretched between us. I have stage 3 cancer, she said finally, her voice breaking. It's in my lungs, Billy. They found it too late. The words hit me like a physical blow, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. The world blurred, her face swimming in my vision as I tried to process what she was saying. Molly, I whispered, reaching for her hand. She let me take it this time, her fingers cold and fragile in mine. I thought I had time, she said, her voice choked with emotion. Time to fix everything, to figure out what went wrong, to make things right. But now I don't know how much time I have left. I tightened my grip on her hand, the reality of what she was saying sinking in with a sickening clarity. She was slipping away, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. All the anger, all the resentment, all the bitter words we'd thrown at each other, none of it mattered anymore. All that mattered was the woman sitting across from me, the woman I'd loved and lost and somehow found again, just as she was being taken away. Then let's make the most of it, I said, my voice rough with emotion. Whatever time you have left, Molly, I want to spend it with you. I want to be there, every step of the way. She looked at me, her eyes filling with tears, and she nodded, a sad, beautiful smile breaking through the sadness. I'd like that, Billy. More than anything. The weeks that followed were both the most beautiful and the most painful of my life. We spent every moment together, laughing, talking, sharing memories, and dreaming of all the things we would never have the chance to do. We visited our favorite places, took long drives with no destination, and spent hours just sitting together, savoring the quiet moments, the simple presence of each other. I watched her grow weaker, her strength slipping away bit by bit. But through it all, she was the same Molly I'd fallen in love with, a woman full of light and laughter, a woman who fought against the darkness with every breath she had left. In the end, she passed away in her sleep, her hand in mine, a peaceful smile on her face. And as I sat there, holding her, feeling the emptiness settle over me, I knew that she had been both my greatest love and my greatest loss. I buried her with the photo album we'd shared on our honeymoon, a small token of the life we'd built and the love we'd fought for, even in the face of everything that had tried to tear us apart. And as I walked away from her grave, alone and broken, I knew that she would always be a part of me, a ghost that would haunt my heart, even as I tried to move forward. In the end, I lost her twice, first to betrayal, and then to time. But the love we'd shared, fragile and flawed as it was, would remain, a bittersweet memory that would carry me through the years to come.